Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. It's the Week 11 reaction show. We got a lot to get to. Abe Gordon, Garrett Chapman here with you, hanging out. Let's talk all things college football because it was a very big moving weekend here in the college football landscape, especially down in the SEC. We got a lot of answers. We also have a couple questions that might have popped up. We'll talk about some questions that the Dogs might have with Kirby Smart. Do they have a quarterback problem? Maybe they've had a quarterback problem. We'll see if it continues to be that way. Carson Beck having some issues there under center. Alabama, they definitely don't have a quarterback problem. We'll talk about what Jalen Milrow was able to do to LSU. Plus, another top 4 team lost as well with the Miami Hurricanes. Huge upset win for Brent Key and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. But lots to get into. We'll do it right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. Before we do any of that, I got to do what I always do every single week. Abe Gordon, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. Well, look, it's no surprise the 12 teams that were ranked and seeded going to be a different 12 this week. And so not a surprise. We knew it wouldn't last, but didn't know exactly how many changes would we be seeing, but quite a bit.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a bunch. And look, let's start here down in the SEC. The Georgia Bulldogs, they got smothered by the Ole Miss Rebels. And last year, it was about this time last year that they went to Athens and they got absolutely blitzed in that game. They got blown out. They got physically pushed around. We talked about it on this podcast. We talked about it. It's been talked about a lot throughout the course of the build-up to this game. And they got out physical in that football game against Georgia last year. And Lane Kiffin saw that. He took the message to heart and he went and hit the transfer portal hard. They spent more money in the transfer portal than just about anybody in college football. This is a tailor-made roster to win right now. And they had some hiccups throughout the course of this season, but it just peaked. And what we saw against Arkansas last week was not a fluke, but more impressive than that, what we saw from this Ole Miss defense.
Yeah, I mean, look, 30 points was our number. That's what it had to be for the Georgia Bulldogs, and the defense did its job. Don't get me wrong. I think there were some defensive issues in this game. You had guys running open. You had a chance to win field position battles and stuff like that. But largely, you held Ole Miss to field goals. 30 points was the number in this game, and Georgia couldn't get there. And look, you're not going to win a national championship protecting your quarterback. And I don't mean the offensive line. I mean the play calling. Yes. They have got to figure something out, whether it's a quarterback change or whatever's going on with Carson Beck. You're not going to win games against teams that can score throwing the ball 6 yards down the field or less, especially not when they have a defensive line that can force 2 fumbles, get 5 sacks on you and put you behind the chains. You can't fall behind the chains if you refuse to let your quarterback throw the ball down the field. And that's pretty much what the problem was with Georgia. I mean, the run game was not really cranking out big chunks early on, and so it wasn't that. And I mean, look, you get that early turnover, you get a score off of that, and you go up 7-0. You say, hey, more of the same from last year. And you showed nothing the rest of the game. Your defense essentially gave you that 7 points. Your offense fought its way to 3 the entire rest of the game. Just a pathetic showing. It's going to bring back questions about Carson Beck. It's going to bring back questions about Mike Bobo. I don't really have an answer. All I can tell you is the team that we saw on Saturday at Ole Miss is not winning a national championship. The Georgia team, at least.
Yeah. That's definitely true. I mean, that's a great point. I mean, like, you spot them 7 points basically if you're Ole Miss, and then you go outscore them 28-3. There's that number again for the rest of the game. And look, it's a pathetic showing from the Georgia Bulldogs. That's the worst I've seen Georgia look playing a football game. Really just a very long time. I could point to some of those games against Alabama that Carson Beck lost last year, or maybe I think you could probably point to that game that Georgia played in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where they got absolutely eviscerated by the Crimson Tide back in 2020. I think that was the worst this Georgia program has looked in the last 4 or 5 years. You know, like, that was a pathetic showing. This might have matched or surpassed that. It's the fact that you can't point to any specific thing. Injuries were an issue for that team in 2020. Stetson Bennett was not supposed to be your starting quarterback that year. et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But no, you have a guy under center who is a second-year starter. He started 30-plus games for you at quarterback. You have an expectation, or maybe not quite 30, but he's getting close to that number. You have an expectation about what this guy is supposed to be. And you talked about you were protecting him. He attempted 12 screen passes in this game. He had 7 short passes, 10 mid-range passes, and only 4 deep passes. And you trailed this game when it was all said and done by 18 points. You lost this game by 3 touchdowns. And you only attempted 4 deep passes. I understand the rain had a lot to do with it. I understand the pass rush that Ole Miss has a lot to do with it. But this has been a consistent theme from this guy from start to finish. It wasn't really until Alabama had just blitzed this team into a coma in the first half that he actually was able to drop back and throw the football. And they only did that because they had to. The rushing attack has continuously failed to get going. The defense played pretty well, all things considered, against a potent Ole Miss offense. But they looked sluggish against Auburn earlier this season. They looked sluggish against Kentucky earlier this season. They looked sluggish last week last week against Florida. And they looked terrible in this game right here. This team is just not good enough. And that's really what it all comes down to. It all boils down to that fact. And it starts under center. It starts with your play caller. There are a lot of issues that this team has. And it doesn't help. It doesn't help when you don't have a wide receiver who can separate. You don't have an offensive line with any continuity because they've all been hurt. Your rushing attack, you don't have a dude in the backfield. I can't look to a single guy and say that's the guy. I assumed it was going to be Nate Frazier, Trevor Etienne coming into the season, but it hasn't manifested itself. It hasn't actually come to fruition. The offense is just not good enough, and that's all there is to it.
Well, look, part of it's not on Carson Beck. This is a team that does lead the nation and drop passes, and I can think back to a couple of instances where Carson Beck delivered a ball that would have been a third down conversion or would have been some big yardage that was put on the ground. And again, partially the rain has a little bit to do with that. But at the same time, you didn't play every game in the rain. You didn't get to the league, lead the nation in drops by playing 8 games in the rain. This has been a problem all season. Look, I think the defense played okay, but they deserve their fair share of criticism. They did hold Ole Miss to field goals, and you do have to, at some point, acknowledge that a little bit. Right. But they allowed drives. They allowed easy conversions. They were not stressing the quarterbacks of Ole Miss beyond that first series, especially when Jackson Dart came in injured in that third series after Austin Simmons had led the team down to a scoring drive. There was a moment that the defense lost me, and I had already thought they hadn't been playing great, although they'd limited damage. Thorson put a punt down to the half-yard line, the 1-yard line, and Georgia's D let Ole Miss out of trouble in that moment. And that was the moment where I'm like, man, this feels like the sort of situation where a different Georgia defense either gets a safety, it gets a turnover, or forces an immediate punt. And neither of those 3 things happened right there. And it was just, again, a little bit of credit for them holding them to field goals, but Ole Miss's offense was able to control the game in this one, whether it was just as simple as field position and force Georgia offensively to prove that they can drive. And obviously they scored 10 points, 7 of which were gifted. They didn't prove that the rest of the way. Back to Carson Beck. I don't know what the answer is, man. Like it's very obvious something's up with him. We've been asking the question about Gunnar Stockton, and we'll continue to ask the question. But until we see him, it's tough to tell. The problem is you got now a Tennessee team coming in, and it's not like you're making a change now. I mean, maybe we see Gunnar Stockton against Ole Miss or something like that. But there was a stretch earlier in the season you probably could have used that time to work it out. But I mean, look. The thing we'll say about Georgia is it still feels like they can be one of the best teams in the nation, but the expectation that they are, at least right now, is gone. Their offense doesn't scare anyone. Like, they don't punk anyone offensively. And I think that allows other teams to come in feeling a little bit more confident than they have in recent years. Can they still win a national championship? I believe so. I don't know how they're going to find it, right? But that's their only hope at this point. I would say they're closer to missing out on a 12-team playoff right now than they are to winning the championship.
Damn. And that's the indictment. That really is it. Because now you have Tennessee coming into Athens next week. And
you lose to Tennessee, you're not making the 12.
You lose to Tennessee.
You're not going to make the 12. I mean,
No.
Look, you already in a situation where you're counting on tiebreakers at this point just to make the SEC title game.
You're not making the SEC title game. That ship is sails.
Right. Probably. It probably for the better, because if you were to play that game and lose it, you weren't going to make it. Georgia's best hope is not to fall too far in the rankings, and they have to win out and hope they get an at-large. They're not hosting. I mean, they're not even going to be hosting. They're probably visiting someone. It depends what other teams do, obviously, the rest of the way. But there's a good shot that they don't even host a round one game.
Yeah. And look, I do know this. So you could go and win Tennessee. You can beat Tennessee next week, and it changes the perception of your season here. Like if they go out and put on a show like they did against Texas, and they win that game convincingly, they flip right back into it. I'm just curious to see how far they fall. In the AP poll, they're ranked at number 11 now, which is the lowest they've been. The first time they've dropped out of the top 10 since 2020. And I mean, they deserve to be where they are. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm interested to see where they drop in the college football playoff poll, which already had them behind Ohio State in that ranking. So it already showed that you have, like, as far as the marquee teams went, there were some question marks. But we'll see how much the college football playoff committee values that win. I do want to say this before we move on, Abe. It's the thing that I saw circulating social media. It was the picture of Carson Beck grinning on the sideline in the fourth quarter. Do you make anything of that at all?
No, I was sitting there when you saw it. I thought you were making a way too big of a deal of it. Look, the same way you don't judge anything by a still photo or a moment. Like, we don't know what was said to him by the guy sitting next to him. Like, at any point you can sit and find some guy smiling when he shouldn't be smiling. I make absolutely nothing of it.
I tend to agree. I did see it circulating social media a lot. Of course, we're located in Atlanta, so you're going to have a lot of Georgia-minded people who are going to be making posts. So we saw a lot of that stuff. But ultimately, if you're the Georgia Bulldogs, biggest question is, can they continue to, not continue, can they start taking care of the football? Because they have not done it well enough, to say the very least. The turnover margin is in the 60s or so in college football, somewhere in that range. It's been very bad. And your best game of the season was probably against Texas. Now you got another UT coming to town, and you can't afford to finish that game with a -3. We'll talk more about that game coming up later on this week. We have our college football preview show that we do. And look, we do this twice a week. So make sure you follow along. Give us a like. Follow along as we talk all things college football. Well, let's talk into another game down here in the SEC. What do you say, Abe? Because Alabama found another gear. I kind of crapped on them last week when we were doing our preview. I basically said that they hadn't proven anything to me, that they needed to go on the road, that they needed to win convincingly, or at least win and look like a good football team on the road. Well, they did that and then some. I think they're just fine now. The Missouri game didn't do a lot for me. That happened at home. 34-0 is 34-0, but you made a great point. You said effectively 34-0 was the confidence builder. It's a shot in the arm. It's something that team needed to see happen to prove to themselves almost that they were capable of doing those things. And the number one reason, and I know you're going to harp on this too, it's Jalen Milrow. Yeah, he runs for 185 yards in this game. He has 4 rushing touchdowns. His performance as a runner, I mean, it eclipsed that 155-yard mark and 4 touchdown mark that we were begging and pleading for them to try and return to. We were like, we don't even need to see 155 yards. Well, we didn't see 155 yards. He added 30 yards to that total. And that 72-yard touchdown run was really the icing on the cake for the Crimson Tide. But on the LSU side, this is a team that didn't fix anything in the bye week. The offense still looked shell-shocked. They were turning the ball over with Garrett Nussmeier. The defense does not know how to stop a nosebleed when it comes to a quarterback being able to run the football. It was decrepit. It was embarrassing. And that place was empty by the fourth quarter. That incredible atmosphere lasted for about a half, and the rain didn't seem to help it too much. But look, when your team is playing at a really high level, you'll sit through the rain. If you're getting blown out, that fan base will leave, just like any other fan base. But I will say this before moving on to you. Look, Garrett Nussmeier, you can't turn the ball over like that. It's the same issue that Carson Beck is having. He had 3 turnovers in this game, lost a fumble through 2 picks, and it felt like, and he also had 3 turnovers against Texas A&M, mind you. That was the nail in the coffin for them in that game too. It was the beginning of the end. Well, really the official end where LSU lost all life is when they were on the goal line and he throws an interception. That was it. Alabama picks it off. They take the ball, they move on, and they take it to the house a couple of plays later. And that was all she wrote for LSU. They had a chance to cut it to 1 score, and we would be potentially talking about a different football game. But Garrett Nussmeier throws an interception. Alabama capitalizes, and they blow out LSU.
I wish I can sit here and say that I'm stunned. This is not the performance from Alabama that was surprising. It was the performance against Tennessee and the performance against Vanderbilt that was surprising. We've had the questions. Why isn't Jalen Milrow running the ball, designed runs? He does so in this game. 4 touchdowns, you mentioned it, 185 overall yards. Against Tennessee, he ran the ball for 11 yards, no touchdowns. Against Vanderbilt, he ran the ball for 10 yards, 1 touchdown. And most of those yards were more scrambles and broken plays than designed runs. I think we saw them call designed runs for him, and it got the offense going. I also think when you look at 42-13, you can look at Nussmeier for sure. And I agree with you. That interception right at the goal line was like, maybe there's a little fight in this team, and it got taken out at that point. I thought LSU abandoned the run, if we're going to be quite honest, a little bit too early. Caden Durham ran the ball only 8 times for 63 yards. He had an average just shy of 8 yards a carry. You got to keep the ball out of Jalen Milrow's hands. You got to run the ball a little bit. I understand that we're all riding this high from Nussmeier, and he's starting to climb up draft boards, and scouts are starting to talk about him. Don't change what you do based on that. And it feels like there was a little bit of that. 42 passing attempts for LSU. Jalen Milrow, 12 of 18. And they had the run game going, obviously, and a lot of that, again, was him, because Jam Miller, Justice Haynes, those guys, they're just not putting up the bulk of the yards right now. But this is the Alabama team I expected to see, and it just makes you question what was going on over this stretch where you didn't really maximize Jalen Milrow. And then the question is, all right, is this what we see moving forward? Is this the anomaly? And we revert back to what we've seen. I mean, it was just last year where we were talking about Jalen Milrow needs to be benched, and what is Saban doing? And he was benched, to be honest, at the very start of the season, the second game. And then he came out in the second half, almost made a run at the Heisman. Is this a point, again, where we see this year down the stretch, these last 4 or 5 games, or however many it is into the SEC title game, possibly the playoffs, whatever, that it's just a totally different Jalen Milrow? I have no answer for why that would be, except that they need to keep running him. This is the Alabama team that we thought would be there for Kalen DeBoer. It wasn't in previous weeks. Good to see them back. Very, very interesting turn the SEC has taken over these last 2 games. The Georgia loss, and now Alabama on the road looking as good as they did.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's Alabama. I'm still waiting to find out who they actually are. You know, I mean, like, this is a huge, unbelievable performance from them here in this game, but I gotta see them continue to stack. I mean, like, look, these are 2 impressive, very impressive performances in a row. And I think I would not be surprised to see them start climbing up into the CFP rankings. But the SEC is just so full right now. I mean, Missouri looked terrible a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and they go and they get a win, an ugly win, mind you, but they're still sitting there 7-2 in the overall, and then they're 3-2, I guess, in the SEC, and I don't expect that to stay that way. LSU's got another tough matchup coming them down the stretch, but I don't know. You get up into this other range where you have 6 teams in the Southeastern Conference right now that are 4-2 or better. You've got Alabama, you got Ole Miss, you got Georgia, Texas, Texas A&M, and Tennessee. It's obviously not going to stay that way. A lot of those teams at the top still have to play each other. Texas A&M and Texas, Georgia and Tennessee. I mean, you've got some teams in there that are going to lose. It just depends on who does lose those games. You talk about a college football playoff down the line. There ain't going to be 6 teams. There definitely not going to be 6 teams that make it from the SEC. Someone's going to get weaned out. I just don't know who it's going to be right now. You floated the idea of Georgia getting eliminated. I just have a hard time seeing it when it's down the stretch and eventually all said and done. But if they lose to Tennessee, I don't see any way around that. At this point, there's just so much talent in the SEC right now.
Yeah, chaos is always the answer. That's what we're looking forward to now with so many 2-loss teams and 1-loss squads in the SEC.
Yeah, but I just need to continue to see Alabama. Who do they have next week? Let me take a look at that.
I think they play South Carolina coming up or Kentucky, one of those two.
It's Oklahoma on the road.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, you get Oklahoma on the road, then it's Mercer and Auburn. So it's Mercer, Oklahoma, and then it's Auburn. So I don't necessarily see Auburn's always going to be a hiccup spot for Alabama. You just never know. Rivalry games are weird. We'll talk about another rivalry game. It was damn near a hiccup spot for one team, but lots to get into there with that. So the SEC just continues to be a wild chase, and we will follow along with that as we go. The Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Stand up, give yourself an applause. Unbelievable performance here from Haynes King, from Buster Faulkner, from Aaron Philo. Brent Key's squad, 6-1 against ranked ACC opponents. Abe, if I told you that this team was down to its 4th string running back, it lost 3 running backs in this game. 3 running backs. What would you say happens in this one? Oh, wait, your starting quarterback also can't throw the football really well. And you're also playing the number 4 team in America. Well, that team won 28-23. A stunner. It is the second crowd storming that team has had in as many years. And they beat a top 5 team for the first time since 2009. Let's talk a little bit about what Haynes King and Aaron Philo did, because that combination, that 1-2 punch that they had with Buster Faulkner was tremendous. I mean, Haynes King, he was hampered by a shoulder injury. They didn't even know if he was going to be able to play up until just a couple of minutes before kick. And he goes and he runs for 100 yards in this game. He connects on all 6 of his passes. He was fantastic in this game. And the fact that the Miami defense would know what's going to be coming when Aaron Philo would come in, the backup quarterback, true freshman, by the way, he hit some clutch throws. He was 5 of 10 passing, but he did get his first collegiate touchdown. He's got some serious potential, but it certainly helps when you end up running for 271 yards. And like I mentioned, Chad Alexander gets hurt in this game. Trey Cooley leaves in this game. Eric Singleton, the wide receiver, picks up some of the slack. They get him some of these end rounds. But the biggest thing, and this was the thing that I talked about leading into this game, hold the ball, have possession, run the ball effectively, and convert your 3rd downs. Well, they did it. They did exactly that. They held the ball for 10 minutes more than Miami did. They were 9 of 14 on 3rd down. They had one monster drive at one point in this game. It was the longest Georgia Tech drive since 2009, Abe. 17 plays, 75 yards, and it soaked up 10 minutes and 45 seconds. And if you can believe it, that wasn't even the longest drive of the weekend. If you just go talk to the cadets up there at Army, they had one that went way longer than that. But it was just a fantastic performance from this Georgia Tech offense. And Miami, I'll let you talk about them. But this Georgia Tech offensive line was magnificent. 0 sacks allowed. They paved the way for almost 300 yards rushing. Just a tremendous performance here from the Yellow Jackets.
And look, credit to Georgia Tech on what they've done. They came in with a game plan and executed it, and whatnot. It's a pathetic performance defensively for Miami. It's unforgivable for Manny Diaz to have an offense in Georgia Tech that's that predictable, and you not being able to control it a little bit better. You got a quarterback in Cam Moore that throws for almost 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. You need to be winning that game. This one falls on the defense. There's no doubt about it. And like, big props to Philo for coming in and making plays when the defense theoretically knew he was going to be throwing the ball. I don't know what they were doing. Haynes King kept kept them a little bit honest, I guess, with six passes. But even the ones that you're worried about him throwing, you knew were going to be short. Just an atrocious defensive game plan to allow Tech to have the success that they did in those moments. But look, we've been talking about it in regards to Miami. They've been playing with fire all season long, and it was going to bite them at some point. And this was the game that I mean, I'm glad this was the game that bit them. Obviously, we're supporters of Tech and what they can do here. So it was nice to see. Look, Georgia Tech for all of their weirdness, like the ACC ranked opponent thing for Brent Key is one of the weirdest things that we've ever seen. But it's legitimate. There's no doubt about that. Huge win for Tech. Miami had been playing with fire all season long. This is the sort of loss for a team like Miami that could see them just completely derail. Now, I don't know. I guess I'd have to look at their schedule and see, like, all right, like they're just not going to derail because no one's there. Like Wake Forest and Syracuse, like, I don't know, maybe Syracuse has a good day and they can, you know, they're not going to lose to Wake Forest, but maybe Syracuse has a good day offensively and we see another loss. Maybe not. Maybe it's too late in the season and the schedule is too easy for them, but this feels like the sort of loss that is going to cost them something. It certainly, in my opinion, is costing Cam Ward a legitimate run at the Heisman. It's going to be tough for him to make that ground up as a one loss versus undefeated. But a pathetic defensive performance with what should have been a pretty obvious game plan for Georgia Tech. But again, on the flip side, and look, I have to attack the Miami defense. I'm not trying to also take away from Georgia Tech. I mean, you've got to give a team credit for having a game plan, sticking to the game plan, and making it work against, again, a defense that should have known it was coming. And sometimes there's situations where you know it's coming and you just can't stop it. And maybe that was the situation as well. You mentioned Philo. Big-time throws in big-time moments, especially in that second half. It wasn't like he was padding stats on, is he going to run? Is he going to throw in the first half? There were key third downs, key moments in the fourth quarter where he needed a big throw and connected on them. And so you do have to give him credit. Now the question is, as Haynes King does start to heal up a little bit, if he does, I don't know the specifics of the injury and just how long he's going to be able to be limited as a thrower. Do you keep with the two quarterback system? It's going to be very interesting to watch as we continue for Georgia Tech. But really nice win. Miami had been playing with danger. It finally burned them. And we'll see if they're still in position for an at-large bid.
Yeah, I mean, look, this Georgia Tech team, they played lights out, and I know the offense is going to get a lot of the credit here in this one. And Cam Ward, of course, got his. He still passed for over 300 yards in this game, but it was really the Georgia Tech defense that had a solid game plan in this one for Cam Ward. They sacked him. I think the 3 times was the final tally, but they got to him and affected him a lot more than that. And of course, you have the 1 sack fumble that ended this game. They sacked him 2 other times, but he had some unbelievable plays where if it's anybody other than Cam Ward, it's probably a sack. But all things considered, I mean, like that secondary played back. They just understood that there were going to be some plays where they're going to get theirs, you know. And the number one thing that they were doing is they just didn't want to get beat over the top, and they were content they took away the rushing attack. They held them to just 88 yards on the ground. They kept them in third and long and third and medium, and you do that by shutting down a rushing attack and keeping your receivers in front of you. Just don't get beat over the top, because Miami really likes those big plays. And if you take those away, they show that they're very vulnerable, very human. They don't want to drive down the field. They want to pop and they want to make you feel uncomfortable because they start putting points up on the board. Your offense then feels like it needs to start pressing and it takes you out of your game plan. And you saw that too with Mario Cristobal. He was going for touchdowns a lot in this game when field goals would have been just fine. And I know I was texting you about this during the game, and I'm like, Mario Cristobal doing it to himself again. He's made some blunders. He went for 2 at one point in this game in the third quarter, and he doesn't get it. And because of that, he needed to score. He needed to score touchdowns later on in the game because he goes for 2 instead of kicking it. And it just, at some point, he just gets a little too smart for his own good, and he's done that a few times throughout his career. But he did that a few times on Saturday. But look, Miami was held to just 30% on third down. That's huge. They were held to just 88 yards rushing. That's huge. But look, they scored 50% less than they do on a normal week. And it's just flowers being thrown at Georgia Tech. And it seems like they just find a way whenever they play these ranked ACC opponents. They end this 2-game losing streak where they really felt like they were starting to scuffle. And they needed that bye week. Now they get another bye week. It's just they've had a weird schedule just based off of the week 0 game that they had. And they get a game next Thursday before then having a Friday night game against the Georgia Bulldogs to finish up the season. But they're bowl eligible for the first time in consecutive seasons for the first time in a decade since 2014. Miami, on the other hand, they're denied their first 10-0 start since 2017. GT slams the door, and Miami just doesn't look so great. You said that the ACC's bid, 2-bid league. You said it's over. Do you still believe that?
It's tough. I would obviously need to see. I got to look more at tiebreakers for the ACC because I think the best chance for a 2-bid league out of the ACC is Miami to stay in the top 12 but not make the ACC title game, right?
They have to. It's Pittsburgh. So far it's Pittsburgh and it's SMU as it stands right now.
Yeah, and so if it stays like that, it would be interesting to see if Miami could sneak in as an at-large. But Pitt's got a tough schedule: Clemson, Louisville, Boston College. So maybe Miami is going to have to win their way in, and they are a 1-bid league. We'll see.
Yeah, so we'll see on that one for sure. If it's Pittsburgh runs the table against Clemson and all these other teams, I don't know if Miami's going to have a shot at the ACC title, but we'll see. We'll see. Lots of football still to be played there. Let's move up to the Big Ten. Indiana. They survive a scare against Michigan. This is the first team. We talked about this on Thursday. This is the first team that Indiana was going to be facing that was kind of a legacy program. Not kind of a legacy program. It's the winningest program in the history of college football. Well, the Indiana Hoosiers, they're the losingest program in all of college football, and it's 137 years that they've been playing football. They're 10-0 for the first time, and it's in Kurt Cignetti's first season. It was a bit of a sloppy game here by the Hoosiers, but one thing that I've really enjoyed is the fact that the Hoosiers can win games in a lot of different ways, right? They can win by just blowing you out, and they just pummel you. They score 50 points. They can win by not allowing you to score a lot of points. They can win ugly. They can win pretty, but they just win. And it's the fact that good teams find ways to win football games. The Indiana Hoosiers might just be a good football team. Now, I don't know after watching that game if they are going to be able to go on the road and beat Ohio State. I don't want to put the cart in front of the horse. I do want to just highlight what looked good in this game, and it was the defense. And I understand that Michigan doesn't have a quarterback. They don't really have a lot going for them on offense, but the rushing attack for Michigan was completely stalled out. Indiana crushed that. And in a game where the Hoosier offense looked as bad as it did, the defense shined. They held Michigan to just the one touchdown. Michigan took its opening drive from its 13-yard line to the IU 3-yard line, but they followed it up with an 18-yard loss and a field goal. And it was a lot of situations just like that, where Indiana was in a bad situation. Michigan gets the ball up inside of the 10-yard line in a goal-to-go situation, and they end up having to settle for field goals. And that's the difference in this football game. They trailed 17-3 in this game. They found some serious life with that interception on Indiana's first play of the second half. They got the ball all the way up to the 7-yard line. They didn't score a touchdown after that. Indiana held. I will say it's impressive to see Michigan come back in a situation like this because I didn't think they could. They did it anyway. Their defense held. They played really good defense, but Indiana, they were just too much. And I think that Michigan just doesn't have those guys. Davis Warren rushing for 69 yards in this game. And there are too many things working against the Wolverines this year, but it wasn't pretty, but a win's a win.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of questions here. Did Michigan find something, maybe a blueprint for other teams to follow to slow down and limit Indiana's offense that has been so high powered this season. I think that's one question we'll ask and look moving forward. And then the other thing is, what did we actually get here from Indiana? Is this a situation where we saw, and we've talked about it over the course of the season here, Garrett, is this a team that won without having their best stuff that day? And that's been the mark of really, really good, sometimes great teams, is being able to win when you don't have their A game. Is that what we saw today? Tough to know right now if that was more about Michigan's defense or more about Indiana just being a little bit off. But you're right. Finding ways to win, winning in different varieties is usually the mark of a pretty good team. They move on. They stay undefeated. And a run for the college football playoffs is still on right now for the Indiana Hoosiers.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing that looms is the Ohio State game. If they can go on the road, they can go to the Horseshoe. If they can get a win in that situation, in that stadium, then I think people will be, I mean, people respect them. I think that they're going to be in a good spot. But when we talked, we saw the rankings were unveiled. We talked about it as if there is a trapdoor sitting underneath Indiana right now. If they lose a game that they're not supposed to lose, they might drop a good bit. And they're trying to create that out for themselves. The CFP is. But look, if you just win your games, then you'll be just fine. And elsewhere in the Big Ten, I mean, Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, they all hold serve. They shellac their opponents. And Maryland and Purdue, Lord have mercy. I know Oregon was kind of in the game late with Maryland. They kind of toyed around with them a little bit before pulling away late. But, I mean, there are 4 teams in this race right now. And Penn State kind of on the outside looking in. But it's going to be interesting with those 4 teams. If one of those teams falters, like if Penn State loses a second time, if maybe if Oregon drops a game, but they're not really in any danger at this point. If Ohio State drops another game, how far could they potentially drop? But I mean, as it stands right now, they could be a 4-team bid, and that hurts conferences like the SEC, who really have 5, 6, 7 teams who really could get deep into it, but they won't get that opportunity because they'll just continue to beat each other up. Because a 3-loss team with this much congestion is not going to make it that deep. Let's move over to the Big 12. We're starting to finish up here. The Colorado Buffaloes, or no, let's go here. Click the wrong one. The Colorado Buffaloes, they blast Texas Tech 41-27, and they weather a 13-0 hole. They were in the hole early, and this was the type of game where I felt like if Texas Tech, I initially was leaning towards a pick of Texas Tech because I thought they were going to be able to jump on them. And I thought that they were going to be able to hold that lead. Well, they got the lead. They didn't lean on him. Taj Brooks does get what he wants here in this game. He breaks the Red Raiders' all-time rushing record with his 137 yards. He's at 100-plus yards in all 10 games for Texas Tech. But doesn't help when your quarterback turns it over 3 times. He had the interception, 2 fumbles. He was sacked 6 times. The Colorado defense really rallied and got around him. But really, Colorado looked terrible in this first quarter. Really, the first half, they didn't look so good. They only have 178 yards in that first half with 26 coming in the first quarter. They finished this game with 351 total yards. Shedeur Sanders, he's been an absolute stud. His completion percentage continues to be one of the best in college football. He has a 69% in this game. He adds a rushing touchdown in this game. He also spreads the ball around really well. If you look at those top 3 receivers that they have here, it's LeJonte Wester, Will Shepard, and of course, it's Travis Hunter. All 3 of those guys had 6, 8, and 9 receptions, all of them over 79 yards receiving, and all 3 got a touchdown. I will say this about Colorado. The thing holding me back from really buying into them as a contender, they can't run the ball. They can't run the ball too well. And by too well, I mean not at all. They have 60 yards in this game. Your leading rusher had, 30-something yards in this game? That's just not good enough. If you get into games where you need a drive, I understand the pass can sometimes work as kind of an extension of the running game, but I need to see a little bit more. When you have those gotta have it plays, and you got to turn around, you got to hand the ball off. If Colorado's in that situation, I have a lot of questions there. But huge credit to the Buffaloes and the Sanders and everything else. The hype train is continuing to build over there. They're in the driver's seat for that second spot in the Big 12 championship.
Well, before I talk about this game, I completely agree with you about the run game. It's the one thing I take a look at, and it's like, man, can they really compete with some of the better teams in the country, just with an outstanding quarterback, an outstanding player, and Travis Hunter as well. A couple other guys that can make some plays as well. Is the run game going to be what ultimately does hold them back? I asked the exact same question as you, because this was an impressive performance offensively, especially considering what you did or more likely didn't do in that first quarter. But you start coming out in that second, third, fourth quarter, double-digit points in each of those quarters. And I know some of that's a little cheapo on that last touchdown that right at the end of the game as Texas Tech was trying to mount a comeback. But ultimately, you recover from being down 13-0, fight your way back. That field goal right before half is huge to make it 13-10. You get the ball out of halftime, take the lead right there. And then it's kind of off and running, and you give yourself a comfortable separation at the end of the third quarter, start of the fourth quarter. Tech tried to battle back, but it was just too much. Really impressive to rebound from that slow start there. And look, there's not much else to say about Colorado right now. Like, we've talked about Shedeur. We know what he is, one of the best quarterbacks in the entire country. Same thing with Travis Hunter. We understand that. But I think it's time to admit, and not necessarily saying you or me, or just there are people though who are just now opening their eyes to what Colorado's been doing this year. And it is more than just two players and a head coach that draws headlines. This is a very good team. How good, I'm not entirely sure yet, but they deserve to be in the discussion in the Big 12, and they are. And so I look forward to seeing just how high they can fly the rest of the season here.
Yeah, they did have that one incident in the second half where Texas Tech fans were throwing trash at the Colorado fans. I know Deion Sanders was understandably pretty upset about that. The Texas Tech head coach actually had to get onto the microphone and plead fans to stop doing it. It was kind of an ugly situation. But I will say this: Shedeur Sanders kind of took it in stride. Of course, they're very famous for throwing their tortillas. He signs one of those tortillas and poses with the band after the game. Something that I feel like only Shedeur Sanders can do and get away with. But signing a tortilla, that's pretty gangster. And I love that. But Texas Tech, I will say this though, they had a great start to this season. They've just fallen off a cliff, and they've looked really bad at times. They've looked really good at others, but they're effectively lost that in that race for the Big 12 championship. They're eliminated from that at this point. But there's now a 4-way tie for third place behind the Buffaloes. So if they do fall back, it gets really, really congested in the Big 12. We talk about the SEC having a lot of really, really high level teams. That B level for the Big 12 is pretty deep. And it's West Virginia, it's Kansas State, it's Iowa State, it's Arizona State. It's a 4-way tie in that conference with teams who are sitting there at 4-2. Lots of really good teams, no great teams really. Unless you include this team that we're about to talk about here. But it's been a very entertaining conference. I've enjoyed watching Big 12 football, and it's not like that high scoring craziness that it used to be necessarily, but lots of fun out there in the Big 12 conference. But let's finish here. It's Holy War. BYU, they escape Utah at the buzzer. They kick a field goal, 22-21 winners in this one. And look, this is your first real rivalry game that I can say for this season definitively. Rivalry games bring things out of players. They bring things out of fan bases, and it brings things out of athletic directors. We'll talk about that in just a second. But it's proof you can never sleep on these types of games. BYU wins this one with a field goal as the clock expires, and the Cougars didn't panic in this one. Utah scored all 21 points in the second quarter. They locked in a 21-10 halftime lead. BYU didn't look very good. The offense, I guess, even when it was all said and done, never really got its footing against a pretty solid Utah defense. Jake Retzlaff, he engineered the 2 fourth quarter scoring drives to seal the game. But overall, he was sub 50% throwing the ball, 219 yards in the game, but 42 of that came on 2 passes on the final drive. They continue to win with special teams and forcing turnovers. They got 2 interceptions in this one. They returned a kick for a touchdown in the second quarter. But really, on a kind of a worrying note, I will say this. Their offense only managed 2 field goals until that fourth quarter. They left a lot of points on the board. And the points that I'm looking at specifically, at the end of the half, it was just a blunder. And you leave points on the board, and in these kinds of games, it comes down to 1. It's razor thin margins here. But Utah, this is their best shot. BYU took it. They survived this one. They keep their undefeated season rolling. The Utes have dominated the series. They've won 10 of the last 12. And mentally getting over that hurdle is a big deal for BYU. It's their first win at Utah in 18 years. That's a big mental hurdle to get over. But Utah's starting their third string quarterback. Brandon Rose was in this one. He had a great chance to go and steal this game from BYU, but he has the interception. He's 8 for 10 for 87 yards and 2 touchdowns with that interception in the first half. But in the second half, he just fell off a cliff. It was 4 of 11, 25 yards. That's all she wrote. But the real story from this game is what the athletic director said after the game. But Abe, I'll give you a chance to react, and then we'll talk about the AD.
Well, look, Utah's coming off a bye week. It makes sense that they can do a couple things to slow down BYU. And BYU has always been a defense-first team. You're not counting on Jake Retzlaff and the offense to win you games, and you weren't counting on them to win you this game, especially not against Utah. You get the special team score. But look, you played clean football on offense, and I think that's for the most part what's important. I know they did They did fumble 3 times, but 2 of them went out of bounds, and 1 of them was recovered. So they didn't turn the ball over, no interceptions. Then on the flip side, the defense, I think they lead the nation in interceptions. I'd have to go back and look at that, but
yeah, I think so.
That's certainly their bread and butter. And they eventually got to Brandon Rose. It was the difference in the game, the 2 turnovers there. So it was a defense-led effort. No surprise. Look, the AD is going to come on and cry about what he thinks was a botched call. I disagree. Now, if you want to argue that the offense was holding and at a separate part of the play, the defense was holding, I'd rather hear that argument than it wasn't holding at all. It's very clearly defensive holding. So you're emotional. You're upset. I understand that. But that was a dumb comment. So
it was also the context of it, Abe. So Mark Harlan, so he comes out and he takes the podium before the coaches come out. And this isn't something that he normally does either. Like this is a unique situation. And so the setting the tone, BYU's final drive that was extended because of what was called the defensive holding penalty on 4th down. Retzlaff, he said after the game, it's like, I thought the game was over. He gets sacked on this play. He thought his season had just come crashing down. They were going to lose out on a perfect season and everything. And then he sees the flag on the ground and second life. And they end up going down and getting a field goal and kicking it and making it and winning the game. But Mark Harlan coming in, you're an athletic director. I understand you have a platform and you're able to come out and do this. But to get up on stage and criticize your officials for what is a correct call is Bush League. Is that the right word? Maybe it's just sort of lowbrow behavior from an athletic director. I understand you're emotional, but you're an athletic director of a Power 4 program. Be better. Like that there's no excuse for that. I understand you want to come out and you want to protect your players and defend your guys, and you really felt like you got robbed and you're upset. Be better. Sleep on it. And if you still feel that way, put on a letter, make a statement. People will still take you seriously. But to get up on stage before the coach and to do that and say those things in front of the media, talking about how the game was stolen from you because of an officiating call, get out of here. Like, that's ridiculous. And you call it's a disgusting performance from the officiating crew. It's a disgusting comment from an athletic director trying to get up there and make comments like that. I mean, to call the game stolen is just hysterical. I understand it's a rivalry game and emotions are flying high, but you're an athletic director, and when it's all said and done, you got to be better than that.
Yeah, and look, ultimately, it was always going to be something he regrets, and he's already come out with a statement today and apologized, and he regrets it. And it's not about the fine; it's not about that. It's about acting like the job you have. I mean, if fans want to go on message boards and complain about they cheated us out of a win, that's one thing. But
those are fans.
You're held to a different standard, and you have to act that way.
Yeah, and he didn't act up according to what he should have done. And I didn't actually see that he had made an apology either. So I'll have to go check that out either. But let's finish up here. We got our Week 11 shout-outs. Abe Gordon, you go first, man.
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand the opponent is Florida State, but you have to give a shout out to what Notre Dame has done ever since that loss to Northern Illinois. These are the scores of their games: 66-7, 28-3, 31-24, 49-7.
That damn number keeps popping.
31-13, 51-14, and then 52-3. You can look at them and discredit them as much as you want, but they have been absolutely annihilating teams that have been placed in front of them. I understand it's not the most difficult schedule. The one game against the ranked team was the close one. It was a touchdown, whatever I said that score was. 31-24. That was against Louisville. Not an easy game, but not the toughest game in the world. I know they got Army coming up too. But for a lot of people who thought that they were buried and out of the discussion after Northern Illinois, they have picked it right back up and blown out teams week after week for the most part.
Yeah, they've looked really good. And I'm actually my shout out is also going to be going the opposite direction, talking about Florida State Seminoles. They're gross. I don't think there's any nice way to say what they have done is probably one of the most embarrassing and pathetic things I've ever seen on a football field. That team is pathetic. It's gross. And I don't have a lot of nice things to say about them. But I will say Mike Norvell, as soon as he signed his, I don't even know how much money he's making. I don't want to get in the man's pocket necessarily, but he just fired both of his coordinators. That was the big news that came through today. We're recording this on Sunday. Mike Norvell fires both Alex Atkins and Adam Fuller. Ron Dugans also fired the wide receiver coach. It was 52-3. I saw somebody it was a gambling person on social media. I think she works for CBS or something like that. But she made a bet that they were going to hit their over, which I think was like 7.5 points or 8.5 points or something like that. And she sat there. They kicked the field goal very early in this game. And it was like, oh my God, they might actually do it. No, they get outscored 52-0. And it's about as ugly of a performance as I have seen from any team, much less the team that just won an ACC championship, that had expectations to go and be in a college football playoff. They were a preseason top 10 team, if you can remember. But I don't know how you recover from this as a program. I mean, you have people who are decommitting. You have recruits who were there in person at games, decommitting from your program, sitting in the stands. It's bad. And Mike Norvell, I think, making these terminations, I think he's trying to do something to save his job potentially, but I don't see any way out of it at this point. What they did this year it's sad. It's a very sad performance, and I really am interested to see how they try to get up off of the mat. But we shall see. They still have another game coming up against Florida. I don't even know who else they play at this point, but they might finish the season 1-11, and that's territory of being one of the worst teams in all of college football. We'll see if they can actually get any better than that. But that's it for the Week 11 show. That's our recap. We do this twice a week, so make sure you follow along. Give us a like on Twitter. Give us a like on Facebook, YouTube, anywhere else you see our podcast. We're on all platforms. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. We are College Football Overtime. We'll see you again here very soon. Coming up later on this week, the Week 12 preview show. That's going to be coming up later on this week. We will talk to you then. Thanks so much for watching.